All of recorded history can be seen as an attempt to understand the world and the cosmos, to understand our place amidst awesome and sometimes bewildering forces.
Thank you! You died for me! You saved me!
For most of human history, religion has played the central role in addressing the basic questions that we encounter as human beings. Questions of purpose, goals, meaning, and order. In modern terms, we might say that religions are systems of belief and commitment upon which the faithful order their lives. In the present age, the achievements of reason and science have grown far beyond the expectations and dreams of those who lived only 1 or 2 centuries ago. Many have come to doubt or reject long-standing religious traditions whose affirmations cannot be proven or validated by reason. Life in the Western world at the turn of the 21st century is largely secular. There are many questions about the future role of religion, and also about what will secure the values that so often can seem to be only arbitrary statements of choice or belief. Humans seem to have understood from the earliest times that we are social creatures. Each person is born into a social context that's much greater than his or her own individual existence. And we come to know ourselves through our relationships within this social world. Every ancient society that we know about understood itself as the representation of a cosmic order. When we talk about a cosmic order, we are saying that the universe is a coherent whole in which every part is related to every other part. To believe in a cosmos is to believe that everything in the world, or in one's experience of the world, is a part of some greater structure. We might say that the cosmos has a larger meaning or purpose beyond the fate of individual lives. The earliest human beings used myths to represent the way in which the cosmic order had been revealed to them. By myth, we do not mean a deliberate fabrication or falsehood. We mean a story that proclaims some truth about an aspect of existence. Virtually every religion throughout history has required that its followers submit to something greater than themselves. For example, the early peoples of Mesopotamia, an area now known as Iraq, believed that the ultimate source of all authority is Anu, the father of the gods. The Mesopotamians believed that Anu was the same as the heavens. Anu was a part of the cosmic order. The folk religions of ancient China, Japan, and India also saw deities in many forms throughout nature.
Most cultures, both in the East and in the West, have had some notion of cosmic order. They haven't always configured it, spelled it out in the same way, but they have nevertheless thought of our life and of nature as, in some way, ordered. Skepticism has called this into question. at the most basic level. It's raised the issue of whether we can even talk about any order or purpose to the universe or to life. It could very well be that we might learn a lesson here from the East and apply it over to the West. In Chinese, there's the word Li. Li talks about principle, order, pattern. The prime analogy in China is striations inside of gems such as jade, very fine jade. When one holds them up to the light, one sees the order. It's there, but one doesn't then ask, where did this come from? How was it created and who made it? The same way, by analogy, the Chinese notice order and purpose in life, but do not ask the question that gives rise to so much skepticism in the West.
The Hebrews introduced a significant new idea when they affirmed that the cosmic order is transcendent. They said that God is in some way beyond or behind the immediate surface of our experience. For the Hebrews, the heavens are not the same as God. They are created by God, and they are a symbol of God's power and meaning. Of course, the ancient Hebrews were developing their religious ideas long before there was philosophy or formal logic. Classical Greek thinkers introduced one of history's most significant departures from religious myth: philosophy. This raises an important question. What is the difference between religion and philosophy? In the Western tradition, the religious cosmic order includes a transcendent personal God. This transcendence means there is an ultimate mystery at the heart of the cosmic order. The cosmic order is thus beyond human comprehension. In this religious point of view, the simple notion of God's will is sufficient to account for everything that exists. But there is no explanation for why God wills things to be as they are. The biblical story of Adam and Eve says the tree of the knowledge of good and evil produces fruit that is forbidden to us. To persist in asking for an explanation of God's will is seen as defying God's will. But in philosophy, there can be no ultimate mystery at the heart of things. The human mind is believed to have access to a truth greater than any particular social or individual order. In a work entitled The Timaeus, Plato says that the discovery of philosophy gave individuals the ability to grasp the cosmic order.
Kaipe, had we never seen the stars and the sun and the heaven, none of the words which we have spoken about the universe would ever have been uttered. But now, the sight of day and night, and the months, and the revolutions of the years have created number and given us a conception of time and the power of inquiring about the nature of the universe. And from these we have derived philosophy, than which no greater good was ever or will be given by the gods to mortal men.
Though Plato says philosophy has been given to man by the gods, he sees man as having the power to inquire about the cosmic order, and perhaps even to understand it. In Plato's dialogue entitled The Euthyphro, Plato describes Socrates asking Euthyphro a question about the gods and morality.
Socrates asks, is something right because the gods approve of it? Or do the gods approve of something because it is right?
If something is right because the gods approve of it, then rightness and wrongness reflect divine judgment. On the other hand, if the gods approve something because it is right, then there is a standard of rightness, a moral or cosmic order that transcends even the gods. No doubt some of Socrates' contemporaries saw his words as an attack on traditional religious practices and a denial that the gods exist. Indeed, Socrates was brought to trial and sentenced to death on the charge of denying the traditional gods of Athens. Socrates was thus among the first philosophers to express a form of religious skepticism. Skeptical questions have since become historically intertwined with the major religious traditions of the West. Meanwhile, the great Chinese thinker Confucius had been laying the foundation for a similar revolution in Chinese thought. In about the 6th century BCE, Confucius rejected the mythology and superstition of traditional Chinese folk religion. Instead, he urged more attention to the social and humanistic values of reciprocity and concern for others.
When Confucius is talking to his favorite disciple, Su Lu asks, "How should one serve ghosts and spirits?" And Confucius answers, "Till you have learned to serve men, how can you serve ghosts?"
Those with spiritual insights have always had to defend themselves against the doubts or reservations of skeptics, and skepticism has sometimes led to religious relativism, the belief that no religion has a unique and valid claim on truth. But it is also true to say that many of the deepest spiritual insights have been the product of skepticism. This symbiotic relationship between faith and skepticism has continued throughout history. The ancient skeptic philosophers were generally conservative. They sought peace of mind first by reassuring themselves that reason is limited, and then by accepting social convention as a substitute. It's important to recognize that philosophical skepticism is not a denial of reason and philosophy. It is a reaction against what it sees as excessive claims about the capabilities of autonomous reason. There actually are many kinds of skepticism, each based in a different attitude about what knowledge is, as well as how we come to know things. A skeptic in one sense is not necessarily a skeptic in another.
Another way to understand the differences between science and philosophy and religion as ways of understanding human existence and reality is to look at the role that skepticism plays in each one of them. Because the skeptical method of science in asking questions and seeking knowledge ultimately leads to quantification. The kinds of questions science answers are usually those that deal with the nature of what we would call truth or knowledge about reality, measurable things. On the other hand, the skeptical method in philosophy has always sought two other things. Not just the kind of truth we associate with knowledge of the world, but it sought to ask questions about what is good or what is bad, what is beautiful or what is ugly. And here, when we're dealing with goodness and beauty, we're looking at things that can't be put into mathematical, quantifiable formula. So in the beginnings, in particular, there are certain affinities between philosophy and science that separate them from religion. It's a bit of a simplification, but we can say at this point that religion is an effort to understand the universe in supernatural terms, philosophy and science in natural terms.
The ancient Hebrews believed that a directly created, benevolent cosmic order will fulfill God's purpose at the end of history. Christianity added three things to this notion: the concept of original sin, belief in the divine incarnation in Jesus Christ, and the expectation that the human race will be redeemed through the church. But if the cosmic order is divine and benevolent, how could evil exist in the world? As some observers have put it, a religion can make sense only if we can affirm its doctrines in the presence of a terminally ill child. In effect, we must come to terms with why the innocent suffer. In the 4th century CE, Augustine was among the first major figures in Christianity to respond to this problem. He did so by using Greek philosophical categories to express Christian ideals and commitments. Augustine did not reduce Christianity to philosophy. He sought to use the power of philosophy to clarify Christianity. According to Augustine, evil is not part of the cosmic order. It inhabits the world because God gave humanity the freedom to choose. Augustine says that exercising our freedom would be meaningless if we did not have to overcome our capacity for self-destruction. Unlike God, human beings are imperfect, and we are free to choose failure or to make choices that are inconsistent with our salvation. Christians like Augustine have not been alone in trying to articulate religious insight through the categories of classical Greek philosophy. Thomas Aquinas was a 13th century Dominican monk who vastly influenced modern Roman Catholic thought. As a Christian, Aquinas said that a transcendent cosmic order does exist. He said that the individual can reach that order through the Church. Aquinas believed that human social institutions contribute to achieving the final end of the universe, namely human salvation. The Church is the highest institution, so then the state must serve the Church by ordering human affairs. In other words, the state does have positive functions concerning the cosmic order, but they are subordinate to the Church.
During the 11th and 12th centuries, works of Aristotle previously unknown in Christendom began to make their way through Arabic and Syriac translations into the universities of Europe, which were largely run by the Church. Those works presented the Church with a couple of very significant challenges because Aristotle took views that the universe was not created, it was eternal, and that while there was something he called the agent intellect that survived the death of the body, it did not maintain any kind of individual identity. And of course, personal immortality is a cherished view on the part of the West monotheisms. In order to defend the Church from these challenges by Aristotle, one of the greatest minds of the West, Thomas Aquinas, began his study of Aristotle. So successfully was he in defending the Church from Aristotle that in many ways he Christianized Aristotle and made him the foundation for modern Roman Catholicism. Now, one of the most famous things that developed out of this is Thomas's 5 ways, the 5 arguments to prove the existence of God, all of which are borrowed from Aristotle. The argument from necessity, that since something cannot come from nothing, there must have always been something, that something was God. These have traditionally been taught and looked at as proofs for the existence of God, these 5 ways. But there's been a lot of research done on Thomas Aquinas recently that point out that maybe that is a misunderstanding of what he meant by them, that the 5 ways in his great work, the Summa Theologia, were not meant to be arguments that God existed. Thomas didn't need to prove that. That was a given for him. That really these 5 ways were just ways of knowing how God worked in the world.
The work of Aquinas was particularly significant because of the way others reacted to it. Some responded to Aquinas by rebelling against the rationalism of the late Middle Ages, rejecting what they took to be its arrogance and hubris. They sought to show that rational knowledge about the transcendent cosmic order is fundamentally uncertain and limited. These writers confronted the anxiety of human existence through an inward spiritual and moral quest for the cosmic order. But they were swimming against a tide of rationalistic thinking that has characterized the modern age, a tide dominated by science and humanism. Throughout the ancient and medieval world, the cosmic order had always been understood to be something external to human beings. Either in the external world or beyond it was believed to be some ordered structure to guide human beings in living and ordering their lives. Said another way, the physical world had always been understood to be suffused with a purpose that was either immanent or transcendent. But modernity changed all that. Foremost among the new influences was the scientific revolution. Scientists now viewed the physical world as a vast mechanism, lacking an internal purpose, or what is called a teleology. Scientists said the physical world operates according to fixed mechanical laws. Any purpose in these physical laws would have to be imposed by God to achieve God's purpose. The great achievements of modern science also undermined the notion that the physical world can be perceived and understood in a straightforward way. For example, the Polish astronomer Mikołaj Kopernik, known in Latin as Copernicus, showed that the Earth revolves around the Sun. This defies our daily evidence that the Sun moves around the Earth, rising in the east and setting in the west. Copernicus said that the Earth rotates on its axis, creating an illusion that the Sun moves around the Earth. The concept of motion and of how we perceive it now had to be reinterpreted. In particular, it now seemed that motion has to be measured relative to the observer. A host of other changes made modern thinkers highly aware, even self-conscious, that so much depends on our perspective in seeing things. Renaissance art celebrated this new awareness. The voyages of discovery also were leading people to understand themselves and the world in radically new ways. Ancient skeptical texts were rediscovered, and this further revived all of the arguments about perspective. Without confidence in an external purpose or goal or meaning in the world, many thinkers decided to turn inward in search of the cosmic order. René Descartes' response to the modern skeptical crisis affirms that the cosmic order is internally apprehended. But it tries to use intellectual principles to establish that the internal apprehension comes from an external, transcendent God. Descartes believed that it is possible to start with internal intellectual principles and arrive at the truth. His argument begins by saying that we can doubt everything except doubt. Descartes then traces the following logical steps.
Since we cannot doubt that doubt exists, and since doubt is a form of thinking, we cannot doubt that thinking exists. If thinking exists, and if thinking requires a thinker, then we cannot doubt that we exist when we think. Among our thoughts is the idea that God is a perfect being. This means that God is omnipotent, omniscient, and good. This idea of God does not come from experience. This idea cannot be invented by me. Therefore, it must come from God. Therefore, a transcendent being exists who guarantees my intellectual powers.
It's interesting to note that this reasoning supports Descartes' famous statement that I think, therefore I am. We also should note that a crucial aspect of Descartes' argument is to assume that an effect can have only the properties it derives from its cause. This means that only a perfect being can cause the idea of perfection. In the 17th and 18th centuries, many so-called freethinkers sought to maintain a belief in God while making it compatible with the rationalism of the Enlightenment. The most radical alternative to the skeptical crisis of modernity that still operates within the religious framework says we reach the cosmic order internally and that this cosmic order is not an external structure at all. This is perhaps the full religious implication of modernity. God is not an external structure. This view does not deny the existence of God. It does not deny the existence of a cosmic order. It doesn't even deny a transcendent cosmic order. Rather, it rejects all previous attempts to explain the cosmic order and how humans grasp it and relate to it. This view seeks to internally grasp a cosmic order that is practical or moral rather than theoretical or intellectual. The foremost advocate for this moral concept of cosmic order was the 18th century Prussian philosopher Immanuel Kant. Kant said that order or structure is based in the way we perceive things. It is not based in any objective quality of the cosmos itself. To reach this conclusion, Kant starts by observing that our moral experience consists of praising and blaming ourselves for the actions we have taken. Yet such blame only makes sense if each of us is responsible for our actions, and each of us can be responsible only if we have a free will. For Kant, the human will is a moral will. Its autonomy consists in self-subordination rather than self-assertion. This concept is a modern counterpart to Plato's insistence that understanding ourselves is fundamental and understanding the world is derivative. Kant's argument also is a modern counterpart to Augustine, who said that skepticism can be overcome only by an appeal to an internal moral source. In the end, Kant says our moral life makes sense only as an affirmation of some religious attitude towards the world. Our commitments to what is right and wrong must come from belief or faith, not from proof. Kant argued that we cannot derive morality from religion and religion from God, because ultimately there can be no proof of God's external existence. So God and religion must be understood by their internal relation to our moral experience. This transcendental revolution in philosophical thought is not a form of skepticism, except in the eyes of its detractors. Instead, it is a response to skepticism, and it seeks to preserve our moral and religious intuitions by internalizing them. Let's now go back in time to identify and understand yet another alternative to the skeptical crisis of modernity. Here again, the cosmic order is reached internally, but now science is believed to explain how the laws of nature cause our internal mental processes to work. The cosmic order is seen to be purely natural rather than transcendent. This naturalistic outlook is the basis of the modern conflict between religion and science, or at least between religion and a certain conception of science. This version of what we might call natural determinism originated in the 17th century's skeptical arguments against religion.
The emergence of modern science was a threat not just to Western religion, Islam, Judaism, Christianity, but to religion itself, wherever it might be found, in terms of the advances in astronomy which question our place in the universe itself, anthropology, which reconnected us to species that religions had not really thought of us being connected to. These changes had effects not merely on how we understood the Bible in Western civilization or the Quran, but also how the Chinese and the Indians understood their faith as well. And the challenges posed to miraculous beliefs spilled over everywhere. Consider just, for example, the advances made by psychology, and how psychology looked inward and said that religious belief was essentially a matter of answering wishes and desires on our part. Why do we pray? We pray because we don't feel that we have control over life. And so these were great skeptical challenges posed by science.
All these tumultuous changes had profound consequences for the world of religion. Among the early effects of these changes was a powerful rationalistic movement that has come to be known as the Enlightenment. Many thinkers now adopted an optimistic, confident view that the power of science and reason finally could conquer the ills of the human condition. Religion had failed to win this battle, and now science seemed capable of victory. What scholars call the Enlightenment project essentially was an attempt to define, explain, and control the human predicament through scientific technology. This was an important aspect of the scientific response to the skeptical crisis of modernity. The Enlightenment attempted to supplant both religion and philosophy with Newtonian science. It banished any other intellectual foundation from its way of seeing and explaining the world. This new outlook is known as scientism. Here, nature is seen as a self-contained system that can explain itself without recourse to any outside source. For a scientist, the cosmic order is immanent within nature. Between 1830 and 1842, the French thinker Auguste Comte published a 6-volume work entitled A Course in Positive Philosophy. Here, Comte gave birth to both a new science, which he called sociology, and to a point of view that soon came to be known as positivism. Throughout his work, Comte expressed a mood that has captured many minds since the 17th century. He said that if the methods of the physical sciences appear to be so magnificently successful, why shouldn't we abandon all other methods and simply apply scientific reasoning to all our undertakings? This 19th century positivist program has been a powerful force right up to our own day. In economics and political science, vastly more attention is given to quantifiable matters than to those we cannot quantify. Many disciplines have sought to align themselves with the natural sciences, often distancing themselves from more philosophical and less measurable undertakings. The proponents of the Enlightenment also used the newly established social sciences to explain the powerful psychological force behind what they saw as misguided religious convictions. Sigmund Freud, the founder of psychoanalysis, said God is a fantasy. He diagnosed all religious belief as an illusion based in the wish for some power or order that does not exist. Sigmund Freud was among those who responded with secular and scientific answers to the modern skeptical crisis. This is the idea that concepts of a cosmic order are merely illusions or human creations. In this view, there is no such thing as the cosmic order. Positivists had debunked religion, and now there would be a debunking even of science. Actually, proponents arrive at this view in stages. First, we might say that even if there is a cosmic order that science can discover, there's no reason to believe that this natural order is benevolently disposed to human beings. Here Nietzsche and Darwin enter our story. Darwin's notion of evolution undermined the view that God designed the universe to benefit humans. Darwin's nature is not a system of timeless laws with clearly repeatable patterns designed for our preservation, intervention, and manipulation. Darwin said that nature evolves in a way that entails both destruction and creation.
Unquestionably, one of the major controversies today is between evolution and creation. I would argue that if they are both understood correctly, they are not necessarily in conflict with one another. The belief in creation that one finds in Genesis is not an explanation about how the universe came into being. It's an explanation of the meaning and the purpose. If you want to put it another way, what religion tells us is the why. What science tells us is the how. First of all, that what's meant by days there could be millions of years. And that the processes through which human intelligence came to become a part of the universe through evolution is something that was not done in days or just instantly on the spot. but took place over millions of years.
Friedrich Nietzsche, the most influential German philosopher of the last half of the 19th century, interpreted Kant's view of the moral order in the light of Darwin, and he gave it a new twist. Nietzsche said that the transcendental order is really a human creation, and that the very notions of nature and science are created by humans. The most famous expression of this view is the message from Nietzsche's character Zarathustra, who says, "God is dead." Nietzsche rejects the existence of any transcendent reality, and he says the Jewish and Christian idea of God is a lie that's utterly unworthy of belief. The death of God, Nietzsche observes, may be slow. Its full impact may not be felt for some time, even by those who acknowledge it. The habit of religious belief may also linger on among the unenlightened. Religious fervor may even increase with growing anxiety about the consequences of this impending loss. But Nietzsche is convinced that the religious worldview and religious values are on their way out, and he warns that their collapse will lead to a crisis of unparalleled magnitude. So he announces what he calls the advent of nihilism.
Nihilism stands at the door. There is a rebound from God is truth to the fanatical faith. All is false.
Nietzsche seeks to go beyond the nihilism that results from the collapse of religious and metaphysical ways of thinking.
We've become cold, hard, and tough in the realization that the way of this world is anything but divine. We know it well. The world in which we live is ungodly, immoral, inhuman. We have interpreted it far too long in a false and mendacious way, in accordance with the wishes of our reverence. That is to say, according to our needs.
Nietzsche appeals for the will to boldly assert itself.
Mankind will the void, rather than be void of will.
Nietzsche is saying that mankind, instead of accepting the void, will prefer destruction for its own sake. Said another way, the alternative to affirmation is to descend into destruction and death. Many have interpreted the world wars of the 20th century to be the fulfillment of Nietzsche's vision. Yet there remains in Nietzsche an element of morality when he says there is more power in self-control, philosophy, and art than in the subjugation of others.
The issue of existentialism, and in particular its relationship to human life, has been very badly misunderstood, I think. The stereotype of existentialism is it is an atheistic view that essentially ends up arguing that life is absurd or without meaning. Now, certainly there have been some on the fringes of existentialism that have taken that position. But for me, the more important existentialists have not essentially argued that point of view. In this sense, there are two kinds of existentialism, what might be called atheistic existentialism and, for lack of a better term, theistic, or call it religious existentialism. The atheistic existentialists have been the best known, and that's the reason for the stereotype. But even those existentialists have not argued that life is completely without meaning. As atheists, they of course have argued that since there is no transcendent experience in human life, a God or a divinity, no meaning can come from that which goes beyond what is human. And most of them have argued that because the nature is neutral, that meaning and value and purpose cannot come from nature. But Albert Camus and Jean-Paul Sartre and Nietzsche the three best known atheistic existentialists, have all in their own way indicated that there are various ways that human beings create meaning in their lives. Some of them have emphasized more the courage it takes on the part of the individual to create that meaning, Nietzsche and Sartre in particular, but in Camus we find the view that human relationships of love and joy create meaning in our lives. So even the atheistic existentialists don't really end up arguing that life is without meaning. They just say we can't get that meaning from a God or from the indifference of nature.
In the 20th century, government has grown rapidly in America and Europe, chiefly by taking over and dramatically expanding what had been the charitable and social role of religious institutions. Healthcare, education, and social institutions funded by government have marginalized the social roles of churches and synagogues. The doctrine of separating church and state also has been interpreted more and more strictly. This has increasingly removed religion from social initiatives and from the public debate about them. The cumulative impact of the modern skeptical crisis perhaps can be seen best in the work of Thomas Henry Huxley, an eminent scientist in 19th century Britain. As a young man, Huxley had embraced theism, believing that the order and design of nature is evident and that there is an infinite author. In 1869, after reading Darwin, Huxley came to reject this theism and coined the term agnosticism to describe his position. An agnostic believes that questions about the ultimate nature of the universe cannot be answered. There is no basis for belief in any transcendent reality. Therefore, we should suspend judgment on the issue. Huxley treated this as a factual question about an external structure, and he maintained that it is immoral to hold a position for which there is no logically satisfactory evidence. Huxley found that even science and the standards of rationality must appeal to certain values. They cannot function in circumstances that are devoid of any values at all. Yet the universe doesn't tell us what values we should affirm. Huxley observed the divine government of the universe and found it to be amoral. It is a mixture of pleasure and pain that has little to do with morality. This leaves us with the question, if moral values are not based on what we discover about nature, and if moral values are not to be rejected completely, then how can we make sense of our moral life?
For centuries, especially in the West, it was thought that morality was always bound up with and connected to one's religion. Now, however, the disciples of Huxley and Darwin, the new scientists, sociobiologists, we call them, are finding the precursors to human morality in species that are not even humans, higher primates.
In many ways, science has been one of the greatest success stories of the modern age. Human health and prosperity have taken great leaps forward due to the germ theory of disease, the harnessing of electricity, the modern understanding of chemistry, and countless other scientific and technological discoveries and advancements. With this newfound scientific knowledge has come many new philosophical insights, and also many new questions and problems. Among the most profound intellectual revolutions has been the theory of relativity, which places the emphasis on the role of the observer rather than on the object observed. To put it in layman's terms, both science and philosophy have learned that what you see depends on where you stand. And this notion has had vast consequences for theology, especially for traditional religious doctrines that make claims about ultimate objective truth. Relativism came to be a prominent feature not only of science and philosophy, but also of religion and morality. By the late 20th century, many theologians accepted the idea that all religious beliefs are essentially valid and equal, that none can justify a claim to embrace ultimate truth. Instead, religious beliefs and moral commitments are both seen as personal, as matters of taste and personal choice. Over 2 millennia after they were first recognized, the problems raised by the ancient skeptics have not been resolved, either by philosophy, theology, or science. Yet continued scientific discoveries about things like the vast size and age of the universe and the sheer power and beauty of natural events and forces have effectively reinforced those religious sentiments that are rooted in observing how brief and how small a human life is. Still, there remain the profound questions about what it means to be alive. Reason alone often fails to answer or settle such questions and issues. But it is also true to say that the desire for meaning and purpose is universal, and that the search for meaning and purpose is its own reward.